Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Martyna Nikody will defend the academic thesis, Biological Evaluation of Biomaterials for the Regeneration of Critical-Sized Bone Defects. May I invite you to present a summary of your thesis and the conclusions.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Dear Prorector, dear members of the committee assessment, dear supervisors, dear colleagues, dear friends and family. In the next 15 minutes, I would like to give a brief overview of my PhD thesis entitled Biological Evaluation of Biomaterials for Regeneration of Critical-Sized Bone Defects. Bone fractures are very common. In fact, bone fractures are among the most common injuries in the world. Falling down the stairs or having a little bike accident, it happens very often. Usually it's painful, but it heals. And this is because our bones have this amazing potential to regenerate small defects. However, when the damage is too big and there is a big piece of bone missing, for example, because of a big accident, because of certain diseases or removal of a tumor, the gap is simply too large to heal by itself. And the healing stops in this case. We call these critical-sized bone defects, and they continue to be one of the biggest clinical challenges we are facing. In this case, surgeons need to step in and fill the gap with something. Very often they use bone grafts. Until today, the most common solution is to use patient's own bone, which we also call autografts. This works very well. However, the amount of bone that we can take is very limited. Also, this means another surgery, and very often this causes complications such as pain or infection at the site where we collect the bone. Another option is to use bone from a donor. However, they come with a strong risk of immune rejection and at variable quality. And then we have synthetic grafts made of ceramics, polymers, and metals. They are safe, and they can be obtained in large quantities. However, they still don't match the native activity that our natural bone possesses. And therefore, there is a strong ongoing need for improved biomaterials that can not only replace the missing bone, but also actively stimulate regenerative processes. And this was the underlying motivation for my PhD. My research focused on combining existing synthetic materials, such as polymers, ceramics, bioactive glasses, shaping them using 3D printing into porous structures, the structures that our bodies can use as a temporary support and then replace with new bone over time. My goal was also to evaluate how different compositions and presence of different additives can influence the biological performance and potential for bone regeneration. We started by combining two very well-known synthetic materials, polymers that are known to be very flexible and easy to shape, with ceramics that are known to stimulate bone growth. Alone, each of them has weaknesses. Polymers don't interact with cells very well, while ceramics are brittle. But by combining them together, we can get the best of both. We get structure and we get bioactivity. To make the material even more biologically active, zinc element was added. Zinc naturally occurs in our bones and is known to participate in a lot of physiological processes involved in bone formation. Then we took this composite scaffold, we 3D printed it into three-dimensional porous structures with various compositions and different concentrations of zinc. And finally, we assessed their biological activity by culturing our scaffolds directly with stem cells. What we saw was very promising. We saw that materials containing ceramic supported the cell growth very well. The cells were attaching very well and stretching themselves very nicely. And this means that the material containing ceramics provided a very good structure for the cells to grow on. What we saw next was even more interesting. We saw that materials containing zinc didn't just support the cells, they actually gave them a little push to start behaving like bone-forming cells. We could see higher activity of genes involved in the bone formation process, and later on, we saw enhanced mineral deposition in the presence of zinc. And this led us to a conclusion that addition of zinc really made a difference. It made our materials more biologically active, and it gave the cells a little push to start the bone building process. After seeing these results, we were very motivated to create biomaterials that are even more biologically active. Because bone regeneration is very closely to blood vessels, which deliver oxygen, nutrients, and stem cells. And this process is essential for successful bone healing. So in this next chapter, the aim was to create materials that can support both bone formation and blood vessel growth. For this reason, we added two more elements, cobalt and copper. These elements are known to stimulate blood vessel growth. Therefore, we wanted to investigate whether we can still preserve this property in a bone formation context. We combined zinc with either cobalt or copper, and we prepared our 3D porous composite scaffolds the way I already described before. And this time, we tested the performance of our materials, again, directly via culture with stem cells, but also with culture with vascular cells. What we saw was very encouraging. Addition of either cobalt or copper did not take away the positive effect we had seen previously with zinc alone. The scaffold still supported bone-forming activity, as we saw with investigating gene expression. In particular, we saw that the effect was the strongest in the presence of low concentration of zinc and cobalt. And at the same time, we saw that these scaffolds are able to support blood vessel growth. In our vascular cell cultures, we saw these beautiful tubule-like structure formations. And upon quantification, we saw that the effect, therefore the network, was the most enhanced in the presence of low concentration of zinc and cobalt. And this led us to conclude that in this chapter, we created composite scaffolds able to stimulate both bone-forming processes and blood vessel growth, two processes that are crucial for successful bone healing. After obtaining these promising results in the lab, it was time to investigate the biological properties of our scaffolds in a living organism. And for this reason, we implanted all of our scaffolds in the muscle of a mini pig. After 12 weeks of implantation, we observed that all scaffold formulations allowed ingrowth of connective tissue into their porous structures. In the case of composites containing zinc and copper, we saw an increased formation of matrix. This is the first stage where cells start to deposit proteins that eventually have the potential to become bone. And these results were very promising for us. We were very encouraged to see the biological properties occurring in a living system, in a living animal, because they matched very nicely to what we had seen before in the lab. In parallel to studying our polymer ceramic composites, we also investigated a different family of biomaterials, bioactive glasses. These materials are very interesting because upon contact with body fluids, they have the ability to secrete different ions that have effect on different cellular processes. So in this chapter, we investigated bioactive glasses composed of natural resources. In particular, they were synthesized from silica sands coming from different depths of a deposit. And even though they were collected from the same deposit, varying depending on their depth, they contained slightly different trace elements. For example, they varied in the composition of aluminium, iron, or titanium. So the aim of this chapter was to investigate whether the small chemical changes can correlate to different biological outcomes. We observed that all three bioactive glass formulations enhance blood vessel formation in the developing chicken embryo model. At the same time, we observed that these glasses stimulated bone-forming processes. They had a positive influence on expression of genes related to bone formation. However, these effects were not equal. They were not identical. For example, we observed that overall, bioactive glass synthesized from gray sand and white sand had the strongest effect on the vasculature, while the bioactive glasses synthesized from white sand and yellow sand had slightly stronger effect on the gene expression related to bone formation. Furthermore, this chapter showed us that bioactive glasses derived from natural resources have a potential for a successful and sustainable bone regeneration. After identifying which bioactive glasses performed best, that was bioactive glass synthesized with white sand and yellow sand, we decided to take a next step, that was combining these glasses with a polymer. The idea here was, again, to combine the bioactivity of glasses with structure and flexibility of polymer. And the materials that we obtained, the composite materials that we obtained, were able to stimulate both bone and vessel-forming activity. In this case, in comparison with results coming from our previous chapters, the difference in the biological activity that we observed came at later time points. And this could mean that these biomaterials could have a sustained result, sustained stimulation of both bone and blood vessel-forming activity. To summarize the main findings, in Chapter 3, zinc added to polymer ceramic composites enhanced bone-forming activity. By further adding cobalt and copper to the composites, we achieved materials supportive of both bone and vessel formation. In the animal model, these materials were well tolerated. They integrated with the surrounding tissue very well, and we observed early signs of new tissue formation. In Chapter 6, bioactive glasses synthesized from natural resources showed composition-dependent biological differences. And in Chapter 7, when combining these bioactive glasses with polymer, we achieved composite scaffolds that could again support bone and vessel formation. With this, I would like to thank my supervisors for their support and guidance. I would like to thank my collaborators and my colleagues who helped me achieve these results. I would like to acknowledge the funding, Merlin Institute, all of my colleagues, my friends, and my dear family. And with this, I would like to thank you all for your very kind attention, and I would like to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation. We will now start with the opposition. And the opposition will be open, let's see where I have the names, by Professor van Griensven. He is a professor of, here it is, Professor of Regenerative Medicine at Merlin Institute of Technology-Inspired Regenerative Medicine of Maastricht University.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Thank you very much, dear candidate. I really enjoyed reading your book. You know, bone is one of my favorite tissues, right? So that was very nice. And I also congratulate the supervisors, of course, with the really great team effort. You will probably know, I will start with chapter 5, the in vivo chapter. When I look at the model, it's an intramuscular implantation model. When I look at the maxillofacial bone defects that you intended to heal, that is actually like mesenchymal bone formation. Do you think that implantation in the muscle is a good model for that to test your material?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you for your interesting question. Indeed, very good observation. Even in the title, it stands that I was trying to create materials for treatment of critical size bone defects. Yet, there is no critical size bone defect implantation in my thesis. The reason for this is because we wanted to investigate the osteoinductive properties of the materials. We wanted to really focus on their biological properties. We wanted to see how much they can do by themselves. And the reason for this is, in a critical size defect, there is essentially no regenerative capacity. These defects don't heal by themselves. Therefore, they need a graft, a biomaterial that will stimulate all the biology involved. That's why the intramuscular implantation was the perfect scenario for testing these properties of our materials, because there is no bone around.
And when you then compare the critical size defect, the cells that should come in, are that the similar cells that you expected to come in from the muscle?
So, of course, there's not just one type of cell that will be involved. In our studies, we focused on mesenchymal stromal cells. And this was also intentional. We wanted to see how our materials can stimulate the differentiation of these cells into bone cells, into bone-forming cells. And indeed, in the muscle, mesenchymal stromal cells are present. And I believe that they were responsible for some of the observations that we made in this study.
Okay. When I then go with you to table 2, you have a lot of different combinations. And when I look carefully, I see that in the zinc copper with the high zinc, and then in both zinc and cobalt groups, you show much more ALP staining actually. So my question is zinc really necessary for that? Do you really need zinc? It's page 137. Do you really need the zinc for your ALP and hence for your bone formation?
I think yes. So I think that the compositions with 2 elements, and we also showed this, that they had a stronger effect. They were more successful. But I still think that zinc is needed. Zinc is an element that is involved in a lot of metabolic pathways, a lot of metabolic processes involved in bone homeostasis. We did not have a control containing just copper or cobalt. But the role of copper or cobalt was to stimulate vessels. It was to stimulate blood vessel ingrowth, sprouting, differentiation. But I'm not sure that that scaffolds without zinc would have the same effect.
It's perfect that you say that now, because it was actually my next question. So when you have the copper and cobalt ions, they are inducing angiogenesis. So do you think that the increase you see in ALP, for instance, is that a direct effect of the copper and cobalt, or do you think it's like they make more vessels, and by that comes other growth factors or other material that then stimulate the osteogenesis? So is it a direct effect or more an indirect effect via angiogenesis?
So in the scenario of bone healing, bone formation, bone regeneration, angiogenic response will always be first, in my opinion. And since the 2 processes are very closely coupled, for sure there is an influence. But I still believe that perhaps there is the stimulation perhaps a faster stimulation of these processes in the presence of pro-angiogenic factors. But I still believe that the presence of zinc is not for nothing. I'm convinced that it's also doing the job there.
Okay, then I go with you to chapter 6, because you now say that zinc is good and everything, and I go to chapter 6, I don't see zinc. So, but you get a nice angiogenesis, you get nice osteogenesis and everything, so how do you compare these two chapters with each other?
So zinc is not the only pro-osteogenic element. There's actually a lot of different inorganic ions that are known and well documented to stimulate osteogenic processes, as well as angiogenic. In the bioactive glasses, I think the strongest elements stimulating osteogenic differentiation, osteogenic processes, that was probably the silica and calcium that were the forming elements of the bioactive glasses. There were also a lot of trace elements, a lot of ions that were there at very small quantities, but as we learned in chapter 6, they had quite a big impact. So overall the impact was similar, but we saw slight differences depending on the glass formulation.
Would you then say what is perhaps better is to take the glass and add copper and cobalt and or zinc?
That's an interesting approach. For sure, it would be very good to investigate. However, by adding copper, cobalt, or any other element to a bioactive glass, we would change it. We would change the network form, the network of the bioactive glass. And not just this wouldn't mean just presence or absence of this ion. The dissolution pattern of this bioactive glass would change. It would behave in a totally different way. Therefore, we didn't even consider adding any more ions to these bioactive glasses. Also because they were very interesting by themselves, the way they were. We had bioactive glasses from one system, but already 3 different formulations. And that was quite enough for us to test. But by adding different ions, we would change. We would create a different glass.
Yeah. And then perhaps my last question. I read your impact chapter with great interest. Really, really nicely, all the different aspects. So when you now look at all your biomaterials, with which one would you go to a company and say, look company, this is the biomaterial that I would really like to go forward?
I think so. I would go with one of the polymer ceramic composites doped with inorganic ions. The reason for this is I think they would be easier to translate. All the regulatory pathways would be a little bit easier to overcome. The polymer that we used for these composites, it's very well known. It has been studied for many, many years. The ceramic that we used to create this composite, it's commercially available. And it has been characterized for its osteoconductive and osteoinductive properties. And then addition of inorganic ions is actually a very good and smart solution. And I think several companies would be interested in this approach because it's a very cheap approach when comparing to biological factors like growth factors or some peptides. So they can be obtained in large quantities in a very inexpensive way. So I would, if I had an option, I would choose to go forward with this scaffold, and I would choose the one with low concentration of zinc and cobalt because I have a feeling that we observed the most promising results from these scaffolds.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy with the questions, and I give back to the pro-rector.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor van Ginsen. The opposition will be continued by Professor Boccaccini, Professor of Biomaterials at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany. And he's online. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Pro-Rector of the University, Thank you very much to the organizers of this event for inviting me, especially the supervisors. And I will start by congratulating the candidate for very, well, to me, dear work, yeah, because you have been working on ionic product and ion releasing biomaterial, which is an area in which we have been working a lot here. So the topic is very, very close, and I think you achieve very interesting results indeed. And I have, of course, some questions that I would like for clarification of what the results that you have presented. So I will start with a question on the selection of the ions, in fact. So as you know, the periodic table of the elements has hundreds of potential elements. What was the rationale to go after zinc, copper, and cobalt? Just the evidence in the literature that there is a lot of work on this, or what exactly was moving you to choose those ions?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you for your question. We decided to investigate, to combine zinc, cobalt, and copper later on in our work because of the very distinct properties, biological properties. Like I already mentioned before, zinc is very, very well known, and it has been very well documented in the literature that it's involved in a lot of different processes involved in bone homeostasis. And copper and cobalt, they are one of the strongest pro-angiogenic ions known. That's why we decided, and also they are very easily available. They are not rare elements. They are not expensive. That's why we decided to just start our work with these three, sorry.
Yeah, you're right. There are a lot, but obviously magnesium is also strontium. They are also have their own. At some point, you have to cut your design of your experiment, and you went for this one. It's perfectly valid, and you answered the question well. These are all 2+, of course, alkaline earth ions in the periodic table of the elements. And I have a question about the fabrication of the TCP, and you didn't really characterize the material itself, right? So you didn't look at the microstructure, you didn't see where the ions went into the crystalline structure, potentially, I assume, replacing calcium or not. Tell me a little bit, how do you imagine the ions have been entering the crystalline structure of the calcium phosphate?
Thank you for this question. Indeed, we didn't invest a lot of time into material characterization for the purpose of my thesis. However, we characterized the materials quite a bit. First of all, the way we introduced the inorganic ions into our composites, into our ceramic, we wanted to avoid substitution. That's why we performed coating of the TCP particles with the ions. And the reason for this was that we knew our beta TCP very well. We knew that it has osteoconductive and osteoinductive properties. And for these reasons, we didn't dare to change it by substituting with zinc, copper, or cobalt. And we, after immersing the particles with coating solutions, we checked. We checked if we changed the ceramic in any way. So we performed an XRD, and we saw that the ceramic remained the same. We did not go any further with the investigation. I know that there could be investigated perhaps further, but we were satisfied with this result. And we proceeded with the biological evaluation of the obtained materials. That was the main aim of my thesis.
So I just assume that the salt is somehow adsorbed on the surface of the particles rather than the ion entering the crystalline structure of the material. Mm-hmm. But you don't have you think, but you didn't check that, right? So for example, TM, you do TM, and then you see of the particles, you will see where the ions are. Because if in your case, and this is what you answered, you have like a coating, you said, of the salt, right, on the ceramic.
Yes, in fact, I forgot to mention, we did investigate, we did EDX analysis to map the elements, to check for their presence, first of all, and also, yeah, where were they, more or less. And we detected presence of all added inorganics.
If in your case, you have a dual addition in some cases. Yeah, you have the zinc, and then on the top you put either the cobalt or the copper.
Indeed.
What do you think? I think it will be a better way of controlling the release of the ions rather than adding the ions to the same particle. Do you think what could be that? How you will do it better? Because the two ions are kind of interacting with each other. There is a synergistic effect, and you have no much control on the release. This is your particle with the two ions, and that's it. How you will do how you will design the composite adding particles in a way that you can control better decoupling, basically, the release of one ion from the release of the other ion. How you will do it?
For example, we could think of creating scaffolds that, for example, that they have the ceramics containing either cobalt or copper on the edges of the scaffold, and then more towards the center of the material, we would have the composite containing zinc only, and that would also be a nice idea when we think about the final application. So implantation in a defect, so the edges where they would be in contact with the native tissue, they would be a bit stronger at attracting the blood vessels, arriving to the material and penetrating it. And then more in the core of the material, there would be a stronger pro-osteogenic capacity. That would be perhaps an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best way, obviously, is to have individual particles with individual ions and mixing either in the gradient way or, as you said, in different zones of the scaffold so that you can create a more complex functionality than just the two ions together. I see this all the time. Also, people do with bioglass. They packed all the ions in one glass, and then, you know, as you answered previously, the presence of the ions will modify also the kinetic of release. And keep it simple. Yeah, so I put one ion, one system, and then you combine the particles. Your answer was right on this. And I think I was surprised that you didn't try that. It will be easier, of course, to have one ion added to the phosphate. And now, I mean, you missed a great opportunity here, in my opinion, that would have been to compare directly in the same, you want even in vitro, the TCP and the bioglass. Because you could say, okay, let's put the same concentration of ions in the two basic materials and try to observe the effect of the biologically active ions on angiogenesis, osteogenesis, etc. You didn't think about that, right? In doing that.
That's a very, very interesting observation. We didn't think about doing that. We really wanted to focus on investigating the differences between the composites that we created. We had different combinations of the ions. We also had different concentrations. So, and we wanted to kind of keep it all together. We didn't want to compare the biological outcomes to another class of material. Sure. So that's why we separated it into different studies. Also, the bioactive glasses that we received, they were very interesting, but also a bit challenging to handle. They were very hygroscopic. So it was already a lot of work to play with them, to work with them and compare and understand what is happening between the different formulations. That's why we didn't really try to compare any other materials at the same time.
I mean, look, if we jump to the glass chapter, and as a glass expert, the composition that you've chosen will not be my first choice, to be honest. First of all, you don't have phosphorus, and phosphorus is an important, obviously, component of a biomaterial for bone. And you have a lot of sodium, and sodium is really quite a bad guy because it depends on the application. It will increase unproportionally the pH, the alkalinity of the structure. In addition to that, and this is just the question, why going for a glass which is somehow uncontrolled in terms of the composition? Because these natural sediments are all changing, and you may have a little bit more of iron here, a little bit more aluminum here, a little bit more. What's the reason for going for such uncontrolled, random type of silicate?
So I will first address the issue raised with the lack of phosphorus. Indeed, there was no phosphorus in the composition of this glass. However, I don't really see it as a very big problem, because the main role of phosphorus in bioactive glasses is to stimulate apatite formation. And I believe that from what I've seen, what I've read, even without the presence of phosphorus, this will happen eventually, later, but it will happen because phosphorus is all around. It will be taken from another place. And the absence of phosphorus, actually, in our case, was advantageous, because when we later go to chapter 7, this allowed us to fabricate 3D printed polymer-based scaffolds containing these bioactive glasses. While other examples of bioactive glasses containing phosphorus would not be that easy, it was still difficult, but they would be much, much harder, if not impossible, to fabricate. Because glasses with phosphorus, they are known to be much more difficult to process because of the temperature.
But not by 3D printing. There's a lot of work on PCL 45.5. So that I will dispute that necessarily. So I mean, phosphorus on its own, when you want to melt, you need and this is the reason you have the sodium. So you could melt very easily the glass.
Professor
because
Boccaccini,
you have a lot of sodium. Yeah.
I'm afraid I have to interrupt you because we have to continue with the other opponents.
Okay.
I think the discussion was very interesting, but
anyway, I understand.
Because of time, thank you very much for your contribution. The next opponent is Dr. Sierro Pastor, Group Leader of Spatial Omics for Regenerative Medicine at Merlin, Maastricht University.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Dear candidate, I would like to congratulate you and your supervisory team for this very nice thesis. It was a pleasure to read it, and it's clear that there is a lot of work in this book. But of course, I have a couple of questions. And I would like to start with chapter 3, with actually the introduction, where you claim that there is a need for affordable bone replacement materials. And my question is whether these materials, the ones that you have explored in this thesis, are really affordable compared to what is already commercially available.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your kind words and for your question. Yes, I believe they are affordable because they are synthetic, they are easy to make. There were no biologics incorporated into these scaffolds, and this all lowers the expenses, let's say. Of course, the price for a medicinal product is not just the cost of the materials, it's also the cost of labor, so the preparation of the materials. These materials these composites were easy to fabricate using 3D printing. They were not that difficult, so the personnel performing the fabrication doesn't have to be very highly trained. They can also be prepared at very large quantities all at once. And another advantage would be that they can be easily shaped to different defects so they could be personalized quite easily. I think even in the operating room, slightly chopping some pieces out. And I think this also lowers the cost of the product in the end. They were compatible with many sterilization procedures, very simple ones, like using ethanol, or gamma radiation with tridrol, also for the in vivo implantation. So I don't see, I see them as very affordable options.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So actually you just touched upon my favorite topic, personalized medicine. And actually in different chapters you have used, if I'm correct, one donor, right, to evaluate the well, efficacy of your materials. Can you elaborate on that? Do you expect that depending on the donor, you might have completely different results?
Indeed, that is correct. The MSCs used in the whole thesis, they came from one donor. Of course, MSCs are known to behave differently depending who they come from. We've seen them behaving differently in terms of proliferation and differentiation, depending on age, sex, ethnicity. However, they were still very clinically relevant. The cells that we used, they came from a middle-aged woman that was undergoing a hip replacement surgery. So in my mind, it was very representative to use these cells on our scaffolds, comparing to what would then happen in a surgery, because we wouldn't usually operate on a very young patient. Oh, probably yes, in some cases, but not very commonly. And to answer your question more closely, it could happen that we would see different results using different cells. However, I don't imagine they would be much different. I don't imagine that, if the cells have the potential to differentiate into different lineages, and we have checked our cells, they could successfully differentiate into adipo, chondro, and osteo lineages. They could also mineralize very well. Then I still see the results as quite representative. Of course, would be better to use at least 3 cells from at least 3 different donors, but that would take 3 times that much time to obtain the results.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for your answer, because we are, at least in my research, we do see quite some differences on the capacity of the cells, at least for cartilage regeneration. So that's what I was wondering, perhaps upon, particular material, all of them react in a similar manner. So I was just wondering what you would expect. And now I have a question about page 63, where you claim the concentration of incorporated zinc was higher in case of TCP with coating solution at a higher concentration, also in relation to the efficacy, but there is no statistical analysis, figure 2A, B, and C. Is there any reason for that? How many times you repeated this experiment?
Indeed, there's no statistical analysis on these results. Perhaps we ran the statistical analysis and it was statistically insignificant. That's why we didn't add any bars.
I do see the standard deviation is rather small, so
indeed,
perhaps
that could be the reason why it didn't trigger any statistical relevance. We did this experiment once, but we used, of course, several samples, at least 3, to collect the results.
So looking at the error bars, probably statistically significant. That's my point, that probably you should have done it, and then the results would be still valid. And I would like to move now to page 64, figure 3, where you show this fantastic microscopy images. But of course, I would like to discuss with you whether the results that you found are just based on the chemistry or also on the topography, because it looks like the topography of these materials are also different. Do you think that the results that you observed are just because of the different chemistries, or the cells, when they are encountering different types of surfaces, they also react differently?
So indeed, the biggest difference is between the row A, where we have just the polymer material, and then B, C, and D, these are the different composites. So there is a difference between the polymer and the composites, of course. And this formulation of polymer that we use, it is known not to be very supportive of cell adhesion. And later in the chapter, we also saw what happened when we seed the cells on it. So the cells react to the chemical cues from the ions, from calcium phosphate and from the added ions, but they also react differently based on the structure that they feel. The cells didn't really like to attach to the polymer alone, while we saw nice attachment on the composites and even stronger attachment when there was the presence of zinc. In fact, the cells were even changing the shape slightly And we think that this is because of the presence of zinc, that it was really anchoring the cells to the surface. This was also showed in some other research. So indeed.
Yeah, okay, but do you think that also by modulating the surface characteristics, you could also improve, let's say, the performance of some of these materials? Yeah.
Definitely, we could do that, and certainly this is going to happen also in the research continuing in our groups. We could, for example, do surface etching on these composites to expose the particles a little bit better, because we think that they were embedded in the polymer, and we see them on the surface, but not all of them were effectively exposed. So upon treating the surface chemically, we could expose the particles even better and then facilitate stronger ionic release.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. I give back the word to the prorector.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Professor Swiatkowski, Professor of Materials Design at Warsaw University of Technology in Poland, and he's also present online.
Thank you very much, Prorector. I also would like to start with congratulations to the presented work, to the candidate and the supervisors. Interesting work and very important to treat critical size bone defects. I have a question relating to the scaffold itself, because in the work, the candidate investigated various scaffold compositions. It was used 2 different polymers and 2 different fillers. Can you elaborate why it was done like in that way? Why you select 2 different polymers and not use one for all the study?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and thank you for the question. Indeed, for the reason why we chose the first polymer, so the polyactive, commercially known as polyactive, the idea in those first chapters was to incorporate as much ceramic into that polymer as possible. And we successfully achieved that. We also wanted to kind of control the release of the ceramics, of the incorporated ions. So actually what I was just discussing with the previous opponent, if we did some surface treatment, maybe perhaps we would get a better release of the ceramic and the ions. But by not doing that, we kind of had a controlled and sustained release of calcium, phosphate, and different ions. For the last chapter, we decided to use PCl to incorporate our bioactive glasses. We also thought about potentially different applications of these materials. We thought, because these polymers, they have slightly different mechanical properties. So we envisioned that the polyactive ceramic composite, they could have an application in more load-bearing environment where the material could take a certain amount of load, while the composites made of PCl and bioactive glasses, they would fit a little bit better to maybe a craniofacial defect where there is less forces pressing on the scaffold itself. That's why we wanted to investigate kind of 2 systems and not just use the same polymer for both applications.
Thank you very much. Because the strength of the scaffolds depends on the matrix, but also on the amount of fillers and also about the bonding between fillers and the matrix. Have you investigated any bonding between your fillers you used and the matrix, polymeric matrix?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? Did I investigate what?
Adhesion or bonding of your fillers with polymeric matrix, which influence mechanical properties of your scaffold.
So we observed the interaction between the fillers and the polymers under SEM, so doing imaging. And we saw always a very even distribution of the fillers in the polymeric matrix. We did not investigate this any closer, any further. This was also not exactly the aim of this thesis, to go really deep into material characterization. I believe perhaps this was perhaps previously done by our groups. And in this work, we really wanted to focus on the biological outcomes and how we can improve them even further.
Okay. So my next question is to scaffold architecture, because again, you use two different scaffold architectures in your studies. What was the reason for that?
So the reason for that was in case of the polymer ceramic scaffolds, we used a very simple wood pile structure for all the chapters. The reason for that was we wanted to keep the structure quite simple because we were investigating quite some different compositions of the scaffolds. So we wanted to focus on the biological outcome and then correlate it back to the composition of the composite scaffold. That's why we didn't want to increase the architecture in this case. And then in the work with PCL and bioactive glasses, we decided to go for a more interesting architecture for the star shape or 0.15 angle of the pores, because we knew from previous work that it has a positive effect on differentiation of MSEs. That's why we decided, in this case, we had less conditions, so and also we had less weight percentage of the filler. So we wanted also give a little bit more of a boost to the cells in terms of osteogenic cues, also with the structure of the scaffold, not just by the composition of the material.
Because there is also different seeding efficiency with two different architectures you have studied, so this could also influence your results. And maybe I will ask one more question. Can I ask Helper to read
Professor Siewkowski, I'm afraid your time is also up. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And we go to the last opponent, that is Dr. Whitlocks, orthopedic surgeon and head of the orthopedic department of Maastricht University Medical Center.
Dear candidates, of course, I also would like to congratulate you with this beautiful work. For me, it was really interesting to read this, and I think it's really important that we keep working on regeneration of critical size bone defects. I was especially intrigued with regard to your 9th proposition, as you can imagine from the clinical perspective. So I would like to ask your paranymph to read out number 9.
Proposition number 9. Effective translation of biomaterials from laboratory to clinic is essential for achieving sustainable improvement in healthcare. This thesis.
Thank you very much. And then I would like to ask you to elaborate on this proposition and give your perspective on sustainable improvements in healthcare.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much first for your kind words, and thank you for this very interesting question. So like I said in my introduction, and for sure you know it much better than me and probably most of us here, what is currently done to treat critical size bone defects is suboptimal. There are many problems, and alternatives are needed. And the way we saw it in our project, we wanted to create something that is easy to make, like I already mentioned in the discussion with other components. That's why we decided to use a polymer that is well known, well characterized, and calcium phosphate that is available commercially, also with very known properties. And not to make it too fancy and not to spike up the price, we didn't go for fancy biologics or very interesting growth factors. we try to keep it quite simple and work with inorganic ions. In terms of the translation, we took the first steps, I believe, in this thesis. We did an extensive in vitro testing. For sure, more can be done and perhaps will be done by PhD students starting at Merlin Institute now or in the future. We also did a very first evaluation in an animal model, which is also very important for translation. So these first steps were taken. What is needed next, I believe, it's the materials need to be tested in an orthotopic defect. We need to understand how they behave in a critical size bone model. And this is ongoing. This has been done by other colleagues. And this will give more definitive answers towards, to answer even the question, do we even try to translate some of these materials? Yes, and then perhaps they are ready for the human trials.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I think you are quite right that we should start with something which is translatable into clinic and which has already some improvement available. The field I am also working in is closely related to infectious problems. Because you showed us beautifully the problem when you have a simple fracture, but in orthopedic surgery we also have quite some patients who have an infectious problem and also have a critical size bone defect. Did you or do you have an opinion based on the studies you did, what kind of material is best to use in infectious situations?
We did not investigate this topic in this thesis. However, there are certain inorganic ions, I think copper and cobalt being among them, that have antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. There are also some bioactive glasses that are already on the market that have or are being marketed as being antimicrobial. And I believe that it's even in the planning for the further studies regarding the bioactive glasses we have used to investigate their potential antimicrobial activity. Because based on their composition and the presence of different ions, they could have an effect. They could have an antimicrobial effect. And my opinion on this topic is that indeed we should focus on this as well as on investigating osteogenic and proangiogenic effects of the materials. We should also check if they can potentially be antimicrobial, or if there is an easy way to add this property. Because if it turns out that either zinc or cobalt doesn't have that property, Professor Boccaccini gave us a very nice idea how to easily adjust that. We just need to create more ceramics, dope them with different ions, mix it all together, and then we have even more properties. And the good news is that we investigated the osteogenic and angiogenic properties. So it should be an easy study now to also look into the antimicrobial properties.
I really like your enthusiasm, because I think that's the only way to go forward in this complex topic. But reading your thesis, I also had the feeling you did such wonderful work, and then you ended up in the mini pig model with the intermuscular scaffolds. I really thought that was a bit of a shame, because I think you are so far that it would have been much nicer if you tested it in another in vivo model. Do you have any plans of doing so in the coming future?
Indeed, but as I tried to explain before, the intramuscular implantation was intentional. We really wanted to focus on the biological properties of these scaffolds. We wanted to see if they can induce formation of bone de novo in an environment that is unrelated to bone. So I think this was necessary and beneficial. But for sure, these materials have to be tested in a bone defect. And a colleague is taking care of that.
Okay.
So soon he will defend his PhD thesis and he will present the results on that. Regarding another animal model, well, pigs perhaps they are not the best to study osteoinduction. They are not the best, but they are not the most commonly used animals. However, they are very closely, physiologically speaking, to humans. Therefore, the results, we can assume that they are very translatable. And using a smaller animal model would be problematic because, for instance, in rodents, we don't really see biomaterial-induced bone formation in an ectopic site. That's why I think the pig was a good choice, was a good model for the purpose of this thesis. And I acknowledge that for sure we need to go further with an orthotopic model.
Now, maybe I think from the clinical perspective, we always want to go ahead too fast. So it's very wise that you are taking so much effort to look at the properties of all your scaffolds and the addition you did to them. Because I also think it's really important when you proceed into the real situation that you think about the mechanical properties of the different materials you will be using, since one of the features you need for fracture healing is also stiffness. So do you have a feeling that from all those biomaterials or all the materials you tested, one is best with regard to the mechanical properties?
Can you give a very short answer?
Depending on the location in the body. I think depending on the type of defect, we would go for the polyactive ceramic composites. And like I said before, if we were thinking about regenerating less loaded areas, then we would proceed with PCL and bioactive glass.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Martyna Nikody, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room. Martyna Nikody, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Moroni is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Martyna Nikody, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Dear Martyna, dear Dr. Nikody, it is really an enormous pleasure for me to be the first to congratulate you on this enormous achievement. I will, in just a second, I will also give a word to your other supervisors, whom I would like to thank very much for helping a great deal with the supervision, especially after I left to wear the beautiful chain that the pro-rector is wearing today. It is really a pleasure, and I say that although I know that in this very room we have about over 450 PhDs every day doing exactly this and getting a degree. But so sometimes we may think that it's a normal thing to do, but it really is not. It's a great achievement. I think it is, especially for each candidate, it is an enormous award after 4 or 5 years of working on something very hard, sometimes very lonely, to finally get a reward for all the hard work. But it is also a very special moment, I think, to enter the academic community as a full member and to be able to discuss with your peers like you did today. So I will not take too much of the time we have for this laudatory speech, because the pro-rector told us that we have to be short and stick to 6 minutes, and it's 3 of us. But nevertheless, I would like to just mention a few words about the very first part of your trajectory, because you started in September 2019. And some of us may remember that only in February, March 2020, we had a thing called a COVID pandemic. And that was a tough time, I think, for many of us, because by that time you had done your experimental plan ready and you were about to start going to the lab, and suddenly there was no lab, or there was lab, but definitely not for the first year PhD candidates, who had to give a priority to those who were further in their trajectories. And because, yeah, we had to share labs, and it was not easy. We had to work in shifts and so on. So what happened at that time is that very often we would, I think almost every week, we would have an online meeting. And you were sitting in your attic room waiting for me, and we were discussing, okay, once I am able to enter the lab, what shall I do? And you were working on your review. And what I noticed back then is basically 2 things. One is that you always looked impeccable. So your hair was beautiful. And that may sound inappropriate to talk about how you looked. But it is actually important because it says something about you, that even in the very hard times, that you could not go to see your mom and your sister, you could not meet your friends, you did not even have time to make many friends. You were so disciplined to take care of yourself, to take care of your work, to always come prepared to the meetings, to work very hard on the review that I finally also made it to your thesis. And the second thing I noticed was that you were very ambitious, because that review, if I had let you write it the way you wanted to have it, then we would have a book of 655 pages. So we sometimes also had to tell you, well, maybe it's enough, and it's good enough, and it is good enough, as you have heard from many of your peers here today. So now I would like to give a word to your first supervisor, Lorenzo Moroni.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Pamela. Dear Martina, I also would like to congratulate you with this, in this special day. You have done a wonderful defense today. Not a surprise, considering how you have been always handling your research, from experiments to collaborations to literature, research, reflection time, and finally writing skills. It has been a mountain to climb, but with you leading the group, a joyful hike to arrive to the top. In these years, I have got to know you more and more as a cheerful, yet reserved young woman with a smile to gift to everybody, no matter how joyful or gloomy your days are. A strong motivation to explore unknown topics and ask the next scientific question, and a genuine sense of curiosity. To this quality, you have added since the beginning a friendly character, able to lead interactions with several partners in the NWO project that funded your PhD position, and to make a true example of team science with Jaiping and David that are here also with us today. Also with us supervisor, actually. The dialogue has always been very pleasant. When Pamela had to move to different places of the university, with Elizabeth, we moved the regular meeting to Friday afternoons. And it actually can be a bit difficult times towards the end of the week. But you were able to transform these meetings always in fun times. And again, together, the three of us were able to combine jokes about experiments, maybe also about failed experiments, with more serious data discussion and lightness in deciding the next steps. And we knew that some of these next steps were not light at all, actually. And you know, the famous or infamous in vivo study analysis that we have spent quite some time on, to make an example. But you were always able to render these moments with a good, healthy optimism in the room. You have been a true example of professionality, provided with politeness, respect, and care for your colleagues. All qualities that we tend to underestimate in a friendly environment, that sometimes we tend and like to create at Merlin, certainly, and in many places in academia, but that are of paramount importance for success. Now, my time is also limited, so I'd like to also congratulate and thank, actually, the members of the committee for taking the time to read critically your thesis, in particular, Professor Aldo Boccaccini and Professor Wojciech Zwiekowski from University of Erlangen-Nuremberg and Warsaw University of Technology, respectively, as well as Tiambo Witloks from our own Maastricht University Medical Center for being with us today, and Dr. Berta Siliero Pastor and Martijn van Griesven from Merlin for participating and chairing the reading committee, respectively. I leave the word to Elizabeth in a minute, but I like just to end up by wishing you always sunny days in front of you. And I know that when clouds will come, as perhaps today also is a good day, as at least climate speaking, not certainly in terms of your special day, you will be well equipped. And I hope that our routes will still cross in the future. And wherever you will be swimming on a new, different professional challenge, or explore new mountainous adventures, I'll be always there for you. It was a great journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
I'm very well aware that my time is up. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to say a couple of words to you, Martyna. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here today and celebrate this event. I need to start by saying that I was not originally part of Martyna's supervisory team, so I'm very grateful to you for actually going and choose me. You are the very first PhD candidate that I have that chose me, and not me selecting the PhD candidate. And it gave me a great opportunity to collaborate with Pamela and Lorenzo, which have been an amazing opportunity for me in my career, but also to be part of your journey. I'm very grateful for that too. You are incredibly focused and dedicated. You are very picky to your results. You are very critical with your own data. And as Pamela already mentioned, and Lorenzo, you are very mature to analyze your experiments and to indeed suggest very actively to your supervisors where should we go based on your own experiments. Your experiments and your chapters came with challenges. You faced 3D printing and material fabrication, which certainly was not there in your background, but then you managed that very well, and a wonderful relationship with JP was born. We also came to that in vivo chapter and the histology, which, let us face it, histology is not necessarily Martyna's cup of tea, but you indeed dig in that histology. And I was very impressed to see, and we, Pamela and Lorenzo, all share that, the amazing, beautiful histological panels that you created on your own. I think by the end of the in vivo chapter, Martyna knew every cell type, every shape of a cell, every tissue structure, possibly in a histological atlas. So I'm very proud of you for that. I knew you were going there, but it was very nice to see. In another side of things, and I think Lorenzo and Pamela already stressed that very well, you are very honest and a very dear friend to your friends. Even our dog Milo considers you a best buddy. Even when you didn't want to share apples with him, he loves you all the way when you go home. And I think being also present in very challenging personal situations, every time we ask you for a friend, for a friend hand, for the help, you are always there for us, and you are always there for your friends. And I think that says also a lot about the person that you are, and certainly the experience at the Merlin Institute collaborated and helped to form the human being that you are today. You have shown amazing focus, amazing resilience. You have had difficulties. I was the one supervisor that took you away, and I know that moving to Aachen was an amazing challenge for you, and you have put a lot of focus, dedication, and strength to this new phase. Certainly has not been easy for a young professional. I gave you leadership, and you face it, and you are doing your best, and you made best effort to embrace the challenges, and you are doing this with a lot of courage, which I appreciate very much. The incredible passion that you put in everything you do, and your passion for your scientific work has brought us to amazing defense today, to a very clear presentation and amazingly good answer and discussion to your peers and your colleagues in this defense. I'm very proud to have been part of that journey. And I really cannot wait to see the next chapters of your story to come. I congratulate you, and I join Pamela and Lorenzo to thank all the persons in this room, Yuri and family and friends, to making this day possible for you. And I hope you enjoy very much the rest of the day.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Dear Dr. Nikody, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. I also congratulate your family present here, colleagues, friends, and maybe watching online also, who followed and supported you during your PhD trajectory. I know that that is also very important. I congratulate your supervisors, and I thank the members of the degree committee. I'm not going to repeat all the names again, but thank you very much. Your contribution is very much appreciated by Maastricht University. I personally really enjoyed your defense, to hear about your research, which is an interesting topic. And I hope your group, the group, will continue to see that it finally enters the clinic, because that's what we all like to see. Sorry to everybody that I had to be so strict in time. So this is the moment to close this academic session. To go to the rector for the reception. We make some pictures here and on the staircase, and then we will join you.